What's up guys, it's Z here, welcome back to Yugioh, deck of the day. Today we have an updated list for the Dark Magician deck. I think I just wanted to make sure to make this deck as competitive as possible. We've made several videos for this deck, but I was trying to convince myself that I did not have to play multiple copies of Dragoon or multiple copies of Radiance Fusion to make it competitive. But the more I was testing, I felt like that, whatever, it's Dark Magician. Dragoon was supposed to be played in the deck, so I actually think that this is the list that you should be playing if you want to play this deck as competitively as possible. If you're not a big fan of using Dragoon, then this video is probably not for you, and there are plenty of other lists you can actually try out in our channel for Dark Magician, but this one is by far the most competitive this deck can get. So before we begin with the video, if you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and now let's get to the deck profile. So to start off with the monsters, we play of course 3 copies of Dark Magician. No matter what version of Dark Magician you're playing, you have to be playing 3 copies of Dark Magician. You won't have him in your hand for Magician Navigation, you won't have him in your grave for Eternal Soul, and now you can actually send him to the grave very easily with Red Eyes Fusion, so you have a way to get it to the grave and get them back with Eternal Soul a bit later. So this is why I think playing a Dragoon deck for Dark Magician can actually serve multiple purposes for the deck itself rather than just having a Dragoon on the field. So this is why I'm saying this is the most competitive version of the deck, and you have to play Dark Magician even in this version. 1 copy of Red Eyes, just need 1, because even though I'm playing a lot of copies of Red Eyes Fusion, the rest are just discard fodder for stuff like Dragoon's effect. You just need to see it early, because it's a deck that you don't really have to summon anything turn 1 to be able to do stuff. Yes, you do play stuff that you can summon turn 1, but it's not necessary to get to them to be able to go into your plays, and because these are the plays that you're going for anyway, because when you're going for a play, your main goal is to either get a Dark Magician in your hand or in your grave and search an Eternal Soul or a Magician Navigation accordingly in order to be able to disrupt your opponent during their turn. This is by far not enough to do stuff during this format, because we do have a lot of ways to get multiple cards out on the field, because we have combo decks like Virtual World, we have control decks like Eldritch, and you have to be able to grind it out. So this is why I think Dragoon is actually a really good card for the format, because not only is it a monster that Eldritch and stuff can really get over, but it also complements your strategy as a Dark Magician deck. So this is why I think you should be playing a version like this. 1 copy of Dark Magician Girl. The reason she's here is because I want to be able to float from the Dark Magicians. It feels so bad losing an effect like that just because I didn't want to play an extra brick in the deck, and yes, she is a brick sometimes, but you can summon her from hand, deck, or grave, so it doesn't matter if you draw her or if you discard her or anything with the Dark Magicians. And just being able to use an effect that gets me 2 bodies on the field as a floating effect while also triggering a circle to be able to banish a card, I think it's too good not to abuse in a deck like this. So I'm not playing stuff like Bond between teacher and student. You can play it if you want, but like I said, I try to make the deck as competitive as possible, and playing stuff like that is not very optimal, because especially when you go for Dragoon turn 1, you are not going to actually summon Dark Magician turn 1 with Magician Souls, because Red Eyes Fusion locks you into summoning anything else, so you will not be able to use Bond between teacher and student. 3 copies of Rod. Rod is the one that searches any card. You can actually recycle Rod from the grave when your opponent activates spell or trap or a card effect. You can tribute a monster to add it back from the grave, so you can get more searches, and you don't really need to see it because you have like 9 cards you want to see turn 1 with 3 Rod and 6 others I'm going to show you a little bit later, that you can actually use only 1 of them, or maybe 2 if you do not have Red Eyes Fusion. But Red Eyes Fusion is actually the most powerful out of these cards you want to see turn 1, but it's not searchable, so you're not going to see turn 1. You can actually make it with Anaconda, because the deck can summon Anaconda very easily, because it does have a monster that can special summon itself, so you can have an extra extender. So you have multiple ways to get Dragoon turn 1, even though you cannot really rely on drawing Red Eyes Fusion turn 1 every single time. 3 copies of Magician Souls. This card is insane, because it can either be a monster on the field, it can either be draw power, it is always an extender for Anaconda, so this is why I said, like, it's not impossible to go into Anaconda turn 1, because if you open Rod and if you open Souls, then you have 2 monsters on the field very easily, so you can also draw with cards with Magician Souls, because the deck does have redundant spells and traps, so you don't really need to use them a lot. Like, you don't need to use multiple copies of Circle, you can't use multiple copies of Red Eyes Fusion, so this is why Souls serve multiple purposes, because if you've used Red Eyes Fusion once, the other ones are dead, unless you want to play something like Pot of Avarice in the deck, which I did not play, I don't think is necessary, so you can actually discard them with Souls to get more draws, so this is another good thing. The only hand trap I play in the deck is 3 copies of Ash Blossom. I didn't want to play too many hand traps, because 1, I don't think you need them, because you're playing a deck that has traps to try to break boards, and also I think Red Eyes Fusion is really good at breaking boards, because even if your opponent has a Calamities on the field, that doesn't make a lot to be able to get you out to not be able to play the game, because yes, you will not be able to use any monster effects or attack with your monsters, but that doesn't stop you you from summoning Dragoon with a Red Eyes Fusion activation, so it's not really that your opponent's stopping you like having a Dragon Link 5 negate boards that you would not be able to do anything if you weren't stopping it. So I don't think there's a combo deck this format that can actually destroy this deck completely, and even if you get a Vanity's Ruler lock on the field, then I do play ways in the main deck to be able to deal with that as well, so this is why I think you do not have to overcommit to hand traps, just play the most generic one with this format, which is of course Ash. For the spells, play 3 copies of Circle. Of course, this is consistency. When you combo this with a Red Eyes Fusion and Eternal Soul, you get so much value out of this Red Eyes Fusion because you do get a Dark Magician in the grave, and the Eternal Soul will be able to get it back, and then you have 2 disruptions, one with Dragoon and one with Circle, so this is why you need to max out. 3 copies of Soul Servant. I really like this card because it just stacks your deck during your turn and during your opponent's turn. This is one of those cards that if I have multiple copies of, I am not going to discard them usually with Magician Souls, just because I can use during my opponent's turn because it's a quick play. And having multiple copies in the grave is actually insane because it gives you multiple draws, and this is another reason Dark Magician Girl is actually not a bad card for the deck, because instead of drawing just 1 card when you use this card's grave effect, you can draw 2 cards every time if you have actually summoned Dark Magician Girl or if you send to the grave somehow, and this is why I think you need to be able to do that, because 2 cards are better than 1 obviously, so this is why this card is really good. 3 copies of Red Eyes Fusion. This is the card you want to see in your hand turn 1, and sometimes when you're playing against Eldritch and they have stuff like Solemn Judgment, drawing multiples is not bad, because if they Solemn Judgment the first one, just slap the second one, and they can't really do much about it. Eldritch is one of those decks that in order to get rid of Dragoon, they either have to bait Dragoon's effect somehow and then use Ice Dragon's Prison if they're playing that, or they have to make sure that Dragoon doesn't activate its effect or doesn't gain a boost from its effect, so they can actually deal with Eldritch being able to special summon himself and gain 1000 attack, but that's only if Dragoon doesn't get a boost by its effect, and sometimes it's very hard to do, but you can do it. So this is why I think comboed with the Magical Circle to be able to banish something else is actually really good, and banishing this format is insane because Eldritch wants to hit the grave, and all those traps won't hit the grave. Drytrons won't hit the grave because they can just recycle themselves again during the following turns to get even more advantage, so disruption like this is actually much more relevant this format than in any other format. For the one-offs, play 1 Magical Ice Fusion. I play multiple copies of Dragoons, and this is the reason why, because you can just top deck this during the late game or just use it with Anaconda to go into a second Dragoon, and the moment you get 2 Dragoons on the field, then you should probably win the game because it's very hard your opponent to deal with 2 Dragoons unless they have droplets, so yeah, that's the only way they can deal with that. 1 copy of Secrets of Dark Magic. It's a searchable fusion spell. You can use it to pretty much get into... This is the only way you can get into the Dark Magicians, but you can search this with Rod, so it's very easy to summon them. And Dark Magicians is actually not a bad fusion monster because aside from floating into Dark Magician and Dark Magician Girl, it gives you constant advantage. They can actually draw cards, and if there's trap cards, you can set them on the field right away and activate them right away. So this is why this card is actually a good one to play, because it's searchable and gives you access to a really good monster. 1 copy of Dark Magic Attack. I've seen people cut this card from Dark Magician. I don't really see the reason why, because in a deck that can actually search a Harpy's Feather Duster, why would you not want to play that? I mean, if you're playing Harpies, you are main decking Harpy's Feather Duster, right? Because you can search it. In a format where we have Eldritch, which is a set 5 deck sometimes, why would you not have a win button in your deck that you can actually get right away with your Eternal Soul, so you can actually destroy them just 1 card? So I don't see a reason why you would not main deck this card. In another format, maybe if we're playing Super Combo and Eldritch is not as relevant anymore, then yes, you can side deck it, but I think in this format you have to main deck it, because against one of those 3 decks, the 3 top decks, having a win button against one of them is actually good enough. 1 copy of Illusion Magic. I still like this card because I'm playing multiple copies of Navigation. I think Navigation is a really good card, not only for its grave effect, but for its field effect as well, because it gives you 2 monsters on the field. And you don't have Eternal Soul always to get into the Dark Magician you send with Red Eyes Fusion back from the grave, but you have another Dark Magician in your hand, so you can actually use Navigation, and Illusion Magic gives you access to this Dark Magician in a searchable way, of course, again with Rod, so that's why I'm playing this card. 1 copy of Call by the Grave. This is here because Ash is so relevant this format, and when you are relying on activating Red Eyes Fusion itself, you have to resolve it, because if it gets Ashed, it's not like getting Solemn Judgment. You will not be able to do anything else if you let Ash resolve against Red Eyes Fusion, so that's why I'm playing Call by the Grave. And 1 copy of Upstart. I enjoy this card a lot in this deck, mainly because of Soul Servant, because I can stack anything I want and then draw it with Upstart. I would not play it if I didn't have Soul Servant in the deck, but because of it, I can actually draw whichever card I want. For the traps, play 3 copies of Eternal Soul. This is the better trap right now because of Red Eyes Fusion. I think back in the day, Magician's Navigation was actually a better card because it gave you 2 monsters and it gave you extra effects from the grave, but this card now, being able to send Dark Magician from the deck to the grave so easily with Red Eyes Fusion and Magician's Soul is actually super valuable. And like I said, searching Dark Magic Attack is actually an added benefit that I would not see why you would not want to play in the main deck in a format like this, so I highly suggest you main deck Dark Magic Attack. 2 copies of Navigation. This is another way to get Dark Magician, because you can just summon one from the hand and then you summon another from the deck. This is another way you can get into Dark Magician Girl if you don't want to wait until you fusion summon the Dark Magicians, and it also has a grave effect to negate spells and traps if you have a Dark Magician from the field, so that's another bonus. 3 copies of Crackdown. If you're playing any control deck right now other than Eldritch, I think you should be maining 3 copies of Crackdown, and the main reason is Vanity's Ruler. So when Drytron lock you under Vanity's Ruler, all you have to do against them is set 1 Crackdown, and during your opponent's draw phase just take their Vanity's Ruler, and they are not able to do anything unless they have a way to get rid of their own Vanities or the Crackdown. They will not be able to special summon, and you will be able to special summon because Vanity's Ruler is not Archeld Christia, it does not lock the owner of the card, so after that you can just destroy them with Red Eyes Fusion and everything else. So this is why I think Crackdown is by far the best generic trap you can main deck in any control deck right now in the format. And 3 copies of Solemn Strike. I prefer this in the main deck over Solemn Judgment, especially in a deck that doesn't set too many cards. Like, for example, if you're playing something like Trap Tricks and you want to set 3 or 4 cards, then yes, Solemn Judgment is actually really good, so you don't get blown away by a Feather Duster. But in this deck, you are actually setting the most at 2 every single time with a circle on the field, but you usually don't set more unless your hand is very, very not optimal and you have a lot of spells and traps, which you don't really want to do it because you want to see monsters in your hand not be able to do stuff. So this is why I think Strike is better, because it's a much better going second card than Judgment, because if your opponent has set up a board, Judgment doesn't do anything, but Strike can actually help you break boards when they activate the effects. For the extra deck, play 2 copies of Dragoon. You have to play 2 because of Magical Ice Fusion. It's very easy to get 2 on the field, and if you do that, then your opponent's going to scoop because there is no way that they're dealing with 2 Dragoon. Even 1 Dragoon is hard enough to deal with sometimes, but 2 is absolutely impossible to do so. 1 copy of the Dark Magicians. I really like this card. This card is by far my favorite fusion monster for the deck. I just really love it. I think it does a lot. It gives you advantage, it gives you floating, it gives you a disruption with the floating, because if you have circle on the field, you can just banish another card because you summon a Dark Magician. I really like this card, and I think playing Dark Magician Girl, even just for this card, would be a really good enough reason to do so. For the Xyz monsters, I play 1 Big Eye and 1 Dracosac. I've just been playing these in the deck for such a long time. Dracosac doesn't come up too often, to be honest, but I don't think there's something else that I would rather have in the extra deck, because it's not a very tight extra deck. You don't really need to do a lot for the extra deck in order to be good. So I just have this here for the just scenario that I need more monsters on the field, because it turns 2 monsters into 3, or I just need to destroy something. And Big Eye is Big Eye. If you're going second and you have managed to bait out effects or anything, maybe you have negated a Calamities or something somehow, then if you can take that monster, then you're just going to win the duel just like that. For the Link monsters, play 2 copies of Link Spider. You have to play 2 because sometimes you are playing with only 1 Dark Magician at your disposal, and you need to be able to get rid of it from the field to bring it back again with Eternal Soul to banish more cards with Circle. So just 1 Link Spider I think is not enough, because unless you can get access to more copies of Dark Magician, which is sometimes hard to do in certain scenarios, you have to keep recycling 1 copy, so I think you need to play 2. 1 copy of Anima. In any deck that plays level 1 monsters, I'm going to play this card because you're relying on your opponent a bit, yes, but if your opponent actually does put monster on the extra monster zone, you can get insane value by not losing any cards, because you can just use Soul's effect, draw cards with its effect, and make it an Anima and take another monster, so that's really, really good. 1 copy of Anaconda. This is mainly here for the Magical Ice Fusion, but like I said, you can actually use it for Red Eyes Fusion if you don't already have it in your hand by just summoning a Rod and summoning a Magician Souls. Heck, sometimes you can even summon an Ash and a Magician Souls in order to be able to do that, so you can actually get a copy of Dragoon on the field without having to actually hard draw one of those Red Eyes Fusions. 1 copy of Masquerena. Sometimes I summon her, sometimes I don't, not really much. Like I said, the extra deck is not very optimal because you can play pretty much anything you want. It's not something that you will play in the extra deck that is absolutely correct in a deck like this. You can pretty much throw whatever you want. Some people play stuff like Ningirsu in order to have outs of Dragoon. I don't really think that's necessary because of my own Dragoons, but you can play everything you want in the deck. There are just a few sets monsters in stone, like the Link Spiders, the Dragoons, the Dark Magicians, and the Anaconda. Other than that, you can play pretty much whatever you want in the extra deck and be completely fine. For the Nightmares, play 1 Phoenix, 1 Unicorn. These come up sometimes, especially Phoenix, because just getting rid of 1 card per turn might not be enough with Circle sometimes, so you need to play around even more back row. And Link Spider is a card that helps me draw cards as well with Phoenix, so I really like that interaction as well. 1 copy of Appaloosa. You can summon her very, very hard, to be honest, but you can't summon her because you get into grind games sometimes and you have a lot of monsters on the field, and if you have more interruption on top of having a Dragoon, that's really good. 1 copy of Vortal Sword. I've never summoned this because ever since I played the Dragoon deck, I think I'm not having any trouble OTKing with this deck. Before, yes, I did have some troubles because having Dark Magicians on the field is not the same as having Blue Eyes on the field, because unfortunately 3 Dark Magicians is not an OTK, so that's why I was playing Vortal Sword, but Dragoon just destroys my opponent's life points, so I don't really need to bring this out, but I just have it here just in case. And 1 copy of Underworld Goddess of the Closed World. If I'm playing Masquerena, I'm playing this card, and this card is actually really good because if your opponent has a Link 2 on the field, then you can actually get the same value by just having 3 of your own monsters and then getting rid of a Link 2 to be able to summon that, and it's a good monster to have on the the field overall because some decks cannot deal with it, and it's a good interruption with Masquerain as well. So yep, that's the deck, guys. I think if you want to play Dark Magician to the most competitive level as possible, then I think you should probably follow the skeleton for this particular build, because if you're not playing Dragoon to its full value when you're playing actual Dark Magician, then you will not be able to do much because the deck is very limited to what it can do. So this is why I think it needs to abuse the card that it was supposed to be for this archetype, but it ended up being for every archetype. So yeah, do not feel ashamed for playing Dragoon in Dark Magicians. It's like playing Needle Fiber in Crystons. So yep, that's the day, guys. If you enjoyed, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our upcoming content, and we'll see you next time.